Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Hello, good afternoon. You are here with Great Pharaoh and Ivor Kovac for your favorite history channel, Rediscovery channel. And today we'll be talking about Egypt. Egypt is a very significant place that represents early human civilization. And a lot of our fans are very excited when they hear about Egypt. So I recently did go on an Egypt trip last month from the beginning of June to July, around mid-July. So spent about 6 weeks there, and it was a really great time. And there was just so much that I got to see. So I definitely wanted to share that with our audience today. So basically, to start, the ancient Egyptians, as we know, they did in fact build the Great Pyramids, and they built the Sphinx. And they truly believed that the rulers were so powerful that they essentially had a oneness with God. They built the pyramids to basically honor their rulers and send them back to their immortal origins. So Egyptians were extremely serious with regards to religion, and they were very zealous, and so they left thousands of remains and religious scripts, also known as hieroglyphics, to convey their understanding of who God was, and or who the gods were, because they were pagan believers. So basically, other than that history, eventually that zeal sort of converted later on into today's major religion in Egypt is Islam, but before then you had Egypt being a Christian civilization. And so I'm very much focused on the Christian aspect of it. I am Christian by faith, so is Ivor Kovac. Hi, Ivor. How you doing today?
Very good, Great Pharaoh. And I have a question regarding Egypt as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
What percent of the population of Egypt is still Christian?
That's a good question. I mean, I've heard mostly been about 15 to 20%. Not quite 20%, somewhere between 15 and 20%. And so you have 120 million people in Egypt. So I don't know, do the math there. I can't do the math off of my head, but I mean, you figure 120 million, 15 to 20% for the most part. So, about 12 million people, and at least that are Coptic Christians. And, that's, I mean, it could be 12 to 18 million, about 12 to 18 million. So, there is still definitely a significant presence there. And they are the original people of the land. They did come from the original pharaohs. The pharaohs did, the ancient Egyptians did convert to all Christianity, in the beginning. And we all know that that Christianity was started in Alexandria. When Saint Mark, one of the four writers of the gospel, came to Egypt around 48 AD. According to some sources, they say that he came in 61 AD, or I believe, but most sources will say 48 AD. He was later martyred in 68 AD when the pagans of Serapis tied him to a horse's tail and dragged him through the streets of Alexandria's district of Bocalia for a couple days, and his body was torn to pieces. And one of the first place I went to was Alexandria. So it was almost unreal. Coming to Alexandria and visiting and basically driving on the streets, basically where the first thing I was thinking about was Athanasius. In our one of our previous videos when we were talking about Saint Athanasius, one story goes that he was riding on a horse and he chased after the Pope and called him out and basically confronted him about ordaining Arius a bishop in the Coptic Church when he was basically spreading his very devilish heresies. So they even the heresy was actually spreading, and people were even coming up with different songs about how the Son was at some point created, or that there was a point where the Son never was, and that the Son was created by the Father. So it was that was one thing. And then that was the first day when I got into the apartment area where I was, or the it was almost like an apartment type of setting, and they have large buildings, and beautiful view of the water, the Mediterranean. And I was also thinking about Saint Mark, who he gave up his life honorably for the Christian faith, and they all know the exact streets and everything, where he was dragged.
I got another question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you know? So we know that the Serapion cult was responsible for killing Saint Mark, but what was it that enraged them? Like, why did they do it? Do you know that?
Why did they come after Saint Mark?
Yeah, why did they kill him?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, he was appointed the first patriarch of the Coptic Church. The church was becoming very, it was established. I mean, it was basically established. We said, when Christ said, I will, establish, he told Peter that, I will build my church on the rock, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Well, the gates of Hades, you can consider, and we're never politically correct here, but the Islamic regime is still very oppressive. Or no, sorry, the pagans, not Islamic regime, the pagans were still very zealous towards their faith. And, they didn't all accept Christianity. So they never did prevail, right? Because Christianity ended up flourishing throughout all of Egypt and still to this day. But, there was obviously some heat there. They're at the gates of Hades, essentially. And, the pagans are at their last wits, and they decide to just go for it. They just decide to go for the Pope, So Saint Mark was ordained the first Pope, and they, just kind of as a sign. And you think it's like from Satan, obviously, and it was a very dark event, just to go after the Pope like that, very violent, right? Not like, can you just have some arguments in the streets, couldn't have any meetings, couldn't discuss any sort of differences. No, Christianity spread its faith, but then there's always that dark, ugly serpent that always shows its head every now and then. So he did have a violent death, and he was dragged on the streets for a couple of days. His body was torn to pieces. His relics now. The church celebrates his martyrdom on the 8th of May every year. His head is in a church named after him in Alexandria, and parts of his relics are in St. Mark's Cathedral in Cairo.
His head?
Yes.
Is it mummified?
I believe they have it. Well, what they do is they add certain spices and things like that, fragrances and aromas, and they pray, and they have vigils and prayers, and then they wrap it up and they put it in a like a vessel. And then they cover the vessel with a very nice embroidery, a nice sort of Coptic type of religious embroidery with the Coptic cross, some nice designs, and then they put in a glass case in front of that saint's icon, so that when they're entering the church, the people will be able to, gain ask for his blessing, ask for his intercession before entering the church or before entering the altar. So,
did you see that while you were there?
I did not personally. I don't believe I remember seeing his relics, because I did not go to the cathedral in Alexandria. But I know it's there. I know his relics are also kind of spread all around Egypt, to be honest with you. And they say the rest of his relics, one source says that the rest of his relics are in San Marco Cathedral in Venice, Italy. So I guess his head is here, and the rest of his relics are in Italy. The Catholic Church has his relics. So St. Mark, look, a lot of people, the church traditionally refers to him as either St. Mark the Evangelist, St. Mark the Apostle, St. Mark the Witness, and St. Mark, the Martyr. So they know, so that was the first place that I went to, was Alexandria. And, I think when I was referring to Athanasius, that was another thing, just driving up on the streets there, just to know that somewhere in that area, he was riding his horse up there to condemn the Pope at the time. And one source says in 323 AD, a synod met in Egypt to condemn the doctrines of Arius. And they publicly certified Arius' views as heresy. Such as action did not slow down the false teacher. And one could walk the streets of Alexandria and hear songs being sung about Jesus being created rather than eternal. There was a time when the sun was not. So, that was also pretty significant, I thought. And after I come back from Alexandria, I went back to New Cairo, where I was staying. My family, we have an apartment there that we go to when we want to go and visit Egypt every now and then. And the first church I went to, I think the first church I went to it's actually called St. Mark's Cathedral, ironic enough, because even though it's not very big like most cathedrals, because it has that centralized dome, they still call it a cathedral. And that was big enough, I guess, at the time when it was built, which was around 1910. And that experience was incredible. To be honest with you, it was beyond words. We do not have old churches here in America. Copts did not immigrate to the United States until 1968. And, we don't have really old or ancient churches, if you will. So
yeah,
unless you can,
there's nothing in here that's really goes back over 1,000 years.
Right.
And if unfortunate, but at least
you don't. And so this happened to be the church that my mother grew up going to. And I went in there, and my goodness, it is a completely different atmosphere. The spirit of worship is so different. So different. I mean, I've been going to church here for all my life, being an American, being born and raised, but to go back to the motherland and to see how they worship and listen to the hymns, the way the hymns were originally intended to be chanted, it's unbelievable. You really feel you're in a higher type of atmosphere or dimension, or it's very hard to explain, but it felt very ancient, very high, very, very, very angelic, and it was unbelievable. After I remember going and taking the Eucharist, and I felt it, man. I felt it. I was like, wow, 2,000 years of history, this is such a heavenly type of experience, just very old.
Did you get to hear some good Coptic liturgies while you were over there?
As far as the Coptic liturgies go, that they hold a Coptic liturgy, so just on Sundays, and I did happen to go on that Sunday morning, and I partook in that service. So it was amazing. It was amazing, to say the least. So that was the first church I went to. The second church that I went to was a church called named after the Virgin Mary in Maadi. That's the city. It's called Maadi, and it was basically one of the sites where the Holy Family stayed in as they were moving in the southern direction in Egypt. They were reaching like modern Cairo, and so there was a suburb there called Maadi, which is in early Pharaonic times was a district of like Memphis, which was the capital of Egypt at the time. And they boarded a boat which carried them up towards the Nile, towards southern Egypt. And this historical church, built upon the spot from which they embarked, also dedicated to the Virgin, is further identified by the denominative. So I'm just reading this one little source here. So basically they were traveling, and they came across like a certain spot or point where, you know, they just needed rest and to spend the night, and they had used a well in the area. You know, just as they were sailing up on the Nile, they stopped by to use a well to get some water. And you know, there were some stone steps leading down to a river bank, and they say that it was believed also to have been used by the Holy Family. So, you know, in 1976, there was a miraculous event where, you know, somebody had spotted like a Bible just floating. And this would have been the 12th of March in 1976. And they found that the book was open to the page in the book of Isaiah where it says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people," in Isaiah 19:25. So when they found the Bible, they kind of took it to the when they just kind of took it off, it took it, and they kind of you know, were just kind of nearby, you know, and they were just settling. They realized that was the same site where the well was used by the Holy Family. So they ended up building a church there. And so, you know, that would have been in the 70s. And now that church, I had visited that church, and I didn't get to use the well. They sort of have it covered so that, you know, nobody falls in. It's sort of in the main church area when you enter the church. It's in a section there towards the left. And yeah, I took a picture of it, and it's quite remarkable. I mean, it's kind of hard to fathom, you know, but yeah, the well's there, and the Bible's there too. They have that same Bible. It's in a case. Just open up to that very page, and yes, it does look like a very old Bible. I have no idea how many hundreds of years old it is, but it was found in 1976. And it's quite remarkable, actually. And they keep it in, you know, they keep it in case. They have the icon of the Holy Family there. It's amazing. So it is one of the most talked about churches in Egypt, and you know, definitely very, very wonderful time just getting to be in that church and praying and receiving a blessing, you know, certainly. And you know, so later in history, you know, when we go back to Saint Mark, you know, under the Romans, when he was able to convert a big portion of Egypt, you know, from pagan beliefs to Christianity, you know, Egypt continued to grow in the Christian faith. And, you know, Emperor Diocletian around 300 AD, you know, he began the persecution, which we know previously as the Edict of Milan in our previous videos that we did. So, you know, he did not have much tolerance, obviously, for Christians. And so, you know, the Coptic Church did end up separating from the Church of the Romans and the Byzantines, you know, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, obviously, but it was just a very violent time, and many people were being persecuted. And
yeah, great Pharaoh. The separation, I'm pretty sure that the schism between Coptic and Greek Orthodox happened after Christianity was already made legal. So it wouldn't have had anything to do with what was going on when Diocletian was there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then the East-West split where the Roman Catholic Church split off was way later.
Okay, yeah. So it was. I was just trying to highlight that it was later on, after the persecution, that the Romans and the Byzantines separated from the Coptic Church. Mm-hmm. And during the reign of Arcadius, which would be been 395, I believe, to like 400 or 408 AD, a number of churches were built in Old Cairo. So that was the next site that I went to, were the old churches, in you know, were the seven churches in Old Cairo. Yeah. So basically, when the Muslims conquered Egypt in the 7th century, they established a new city called Fustat, which was outside the walls of the Babylonian fortress, and Fustat became the administrative capital of Egypt, and it replaced Alexandria. And at the time and the early years of Arab rule, the Copts were allowed to build several churches. within the old fortress area. And some of the oldest churches there in Cairo now are Church of Saint Barbara, the Church of the Saint Sergius and Bacchus, and are dated around that time, so from the late 7th or early 8th century. So, to be able to go in those churches and say that, wow, this is like 1,200 years old. These churches are centuries and centuries and centuries years old. Was quite amazing, unlike anything I'd ever seen. And in the Fatimid period, the Coptic Patriarch was moved from Alexandria to Fustat. So that would have been during the Patriarchate of Pope Cyril II, which would have been 1078 to 1092. And so they just wanted the Coptic Pope to basically stay closer to the capital, just so he's more safer. And so, yeah, the new seat of the Patriarchate had become the Church of the Virgin Mother, which is also known as the Hanging Church. And there's also St. Mercurius Church there, which is close by. And those two churches served as the main places where the Coptic Pope would reside in. So in the 14th century, the seat was then moved to the Church of Virgin Mary in Harat Zawaliya, which was at that time central Cairo. So 7 churches. You have St. Mary's Church, St. Mercurius Church, St. Sergius and Bacchus Church, the Hanging Church, Church of the Holy Virgin, St. Barbara Church, and the Church of St. Minas. So it was very beautiful. All the churches, everyone is just unique in their own way. But just for the most part, when you go inside, you feel that ancient type of presence. You see the icons, you see the old icons, ancient. You go in, you get a candle, you do a little prayer. You can put something in the donation box if you'd like. But yeah, there's so many icons, there's so many relics of saints, and you just get their blessings. And you go in and you see the sites. You go to the St. Mary's, the Virgin Mother's Church, and you go in and you see, and I believe in St. Sergius and Bacchus Church, were both sites where the Holy Family stayed. So you'll actually go in in the altar, and you'll see literally the room where they stayed, and you'll see also another well that the Holy Family had used. And I actually drank from that well as well.
The room where they stayed?
Yes.
So then okay, so it wouldn't have been a church back then, right? There must have been some. So basically the old building, whatever it was that they stayed in, they built the church around that building.
Yeah.
And then integrated it.
Yeah, it would basically have been an underground. It's like an underground room, like an underground sort of hideout area, so to speak. They were
have pictures of that stuff?
I have pictures of being at that church and the very well that was used by the Holy Family and that room that they stayed in. I have pictures, and I did take pictures there.
All right, great. Yeah, let's make sure to include that so everybody can see that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, certainly. I mean, they'll see pictures of the icons, they'll see pictures of the room that they stayed in, the well, just that ancient artwork, even back in the day, they had the pastor, or not the priest at the time would actually be standing up in some sort of like a podium or something, but it was kind of like an elevated type of like balcony looking structure, if you will. And so, he would preach from there. So that's how the old churches were. So, for the most part, there was other places too. So like, there was St. George Monastery, which is next to the 7 old churches. And there was also St. George Church, which was built by the Greek Orthodox Church. That's pretty old. It wasn't 1,400 years old or anything, but it was about a century and a quarter, about 125 years old. St. George Church. So, one source says that, during St. George's life, in the time when he was being persecuted, very, very words had been spoken to him by the Lord Jesus Christ, or any that was documented. But from a manuscript of St. George, which was kept in St. George's Convent in Old Cairo, it says that God told him, "I swear by myself, my beloved George, that as there was no one born of woman greater than John the Baptist, also no martyr resembles you. You will have no counterpart among them. I made your name spread in my kingdom and gave it grace and made it a port of safety for all mankind. Whoever in distress calls on your name, either man or woman, I will quickly answer and give them their heart's request. So that's absolutely beautiful to me, that piece of history, and I did go to that monastery or not monastery, but the convent, and it's absolutely beautiful. And there's a lot of history there, and that church also was obviously a huge icon, of respect for St. George. So at the entrance, one set of the stairs leads to the shrine, and the other leads upstairs to where the nuns live. So within this entrance hall, there's an icon of great martyr St. George, which was made in January 1988. That was the year I was born. That's kind of cool. I was born in March 88. And the design is copied from a historical icon, which is present in the convent. So this ancient icon, which dates back, I believe it was the 19th century, it's basically like a Greek style kind of art. So it depicts the 7 crowns of St. George that he had dealt with, for being tortured 7 years in martyrdoms by 70 lawless leaders. So, in the upper part of the icon, there are two angels that are sort of descending from heaven. The angel on the right holds 6 crowns with his left hand, while together the 2 angels place the 7th crown on St. George's head. And so this proves the promise of God to him. And also the shrine also has like a main hall area, and it has like 7 rooms with wooden doors leading into them. And they were also had some nice carvings and decorations and things like that. And so that was really cool. And there's also like a huge ancient door that I saw there, which also I do have photography of, leading from the main hall to the interior, partitioned. And they're very just tall doors. They're very tall doors, which also date back to like the 10th century. And so, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. And I do have photos of that. And it was absolutely beautiful. So I remember, I did like a small prayer there, like you light a candle. There's like places, there's nice icons, and then there's like also the chains. They have the chains that are hung there, where he was tortured with, essentially the original chains that was put around his neck. And you take those chains and you can wear them. You can wear it over your neck and you can pray, or you can just hang on to them, whatever you want.
They still let people touch the chains?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I used to think it was in like a little like box or something like that, but no, or like a not a box, but like some sort of container or something, so people can't damage it, but they let people hold it and they let people to get a blessing from it. So it's amazing, and it was basically most of his persecution was under the Persian king Didanius, but there were 70 rulers who basically casted judgment on him over 7 years, and they would just sentence him to be tortured, and they had all sorts of instruments back then. You can imagine. I mean, the Romans were absolutely they were absolutely vile. They were merciless.
You said Persian king, Great Pharaoh?
Persian king Didanius.
How were the Persians coming into it?
Well, he might have had Persian origin, I guess. And it's still been part of the Roman Empire.
Okay. Yeah, I know there were quite a few different conflicts between the Romans and the Persians.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, and
yeah. I mean,
I haven't.
And they have a wheel. There's also like a wheel there.
Yeah.
That they used to dismember his body. It was very, very violent. He is truly, if not the biggest saint that is constantly talked about after Saint Mary. I mean, I can't think of
Saint Nicholas.
I mean, it doesn't even come. I mean, yeah, you think Saint Nicholas, okay, and he started Christmas, right? You think that he'd be mention all the time. But in the Coptic Church, it doesn't even come close.
Yeah.
St. Nicholas doesn't even come close to this great martyr. I mean, this guy suffered for 7 years. You know, we're talking about like almost day, you know, maybe you know, it was maybe a month at a time or something. Maybe they gave him a chance to for the man to recover. But I mean, you're talking about 7 years and 70 different lawless rulers who basically just like they used his tortures to scare people, to gain power, to scare people, to show them who was in charge. And little did they know how little they were, because St. George represent the living God, the living, breathing God, and Logos, the Word, Jesus Christ. So, you know, he's a big saint, and everybody all around the world knows about St. George. And it was unbelievable to be there and to see actual change and to be able to hold them. I mean, it's unbelievable. No one is, there's no one worthy of something like that. But we ask him to intercede for us. We ask him to pray for us. I mean, he's a great martyr. They call him the Prince of Martyrs. So there also is a Greek Orthodox Church there that they built in honor of St. George, and it's relatively new to the other churches. So this church was built in 1904, and what you'll see there is St. George and the dragon, because they said that, you know, tradition says that he had once killed the dragon before, and you know, the church was basically destroyed by a fire early, but it was later rebuilt. And you know, the church today is built on top of an ancient Roman tower, and it connects to the monastery below. So once we visited the monastery, we got to go see the church. And you're talking about a century and a quarter, about yeah, 1.25 century old. So, and it's amazing. I mean, I went in the church, and you can't even take any pictures or photos or anything like that. But the guy was very nice enough and gracious to let us take photos. And so, you know, I was just so amazed at the architecture, the beauty inside, and yeah, it's 125 years old. There's bells. There's bells, like kind of when you enter, you go up the steps. There's like a little chamber where the bells are, and I took pictures there. I took pictures in front of the carving of St. George and the dragon, and yeah, I took a lot of pictures and took pictures inside of the church. So there's not a lot of people, like, I think people do still worship in that church, but it's also like for tourism and stuff today. It's open to all visitors of all religions, you know, and so yeah, it's absolutely beautiful piece of beautiful architecture at the time, very masterful type of work. It was amazing, you know, and you know, and so I really enjoyed the experience, you know, to be able to see all that in Egypt. People just don't know, you know, that Egypt, since the time of the ancient Egyptians, it really all just kind of followed through. It really, you know, the Egyptian people really, you know, all throughout history, it all makes sense, you know, very religious, very, very serious about their religion, that they even considered their rulers to be divine. And so over time, when they finally get the news of the gospel, you know, they begin to live the gospel, and these people embrace Christ, and they begin getting persecuted like Christ. And the gospel has been flourishing all around Egypt for hundreds and hundreds of years, since the time when Christianity first came and they were trying to reach out to the pagans, since, you know, since it flourished in Alexandria and became the center of knowledge and the center of, you know, it was one of the 5 original cities, Christian cities, you know, to unite the church. And Saint Mark was ordained as Pope, and he was in charge of it. It's remarkable. And then you have the Islamic rule, right, that came through, and and the church got persecuted again, but still overcoming, constantly overcoming, and finding victory over and over again. So the Coptic Christians are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. That's their country. They, when I go there, as you get older, you do see more, right? As much as we don't want to see, it is an Islamic run regime government. So it's kind of difficult. Everybody wants to say they're at peace and they're one, and of course you want to unite everybody. That's the wisest way of going about it. But is there still tension there? Absolutely. So if there's anything, Eva or Kovac, you wanted to add or had any questions, feel free.
I'm interested in how the Apostle Mark proselytized Egypt and the kind of stuff that he did there. So we can see from in the Bible, a lot of the New Testament was written by Paul, and we see how he interacted with the Greeks. Like I don't think you were here for it, but it was one of the videos I did with Stilgar, where they talk about the unknown God and how in Athens they had an altar or a shrine set up to the unknown God, and there was no image associated with that one. And so the sermon that Paul preached there, he said, "Hey, I'm here to tell you about the unknown God," and it didn't really seem like it would work to convince atheists today, like if you used it on them. But actually, what I found out is that Plato in the Critias and Timaeus dialogues had written that the Greek gods were not the gods responsible for creation. It was an eternal God who lived. So he thought that the Greek gods were just aspects of the physical universe. He did believe they existed, but he didn't think that they were responsible for the creation. He said, whoever created is unknown to us, and he lives outside of the universe, and he made the universe in the image of his own ideas, like this kind of stuff. So basically, he primed them for Christianity, and I'm wondering, so I was able to kind of see some of the stuff that Paul was referring to just in my own readings, and I'm wondering how they did it with the Egyptians, because to my knowledge, I mean, like, I don't know how much Greek philosophy was relevant. They had their own paganism. So, that might be another topic. If you can find out what sort of dialogue and methodology was used and how the first Egyptians were converted, that would probably be something that's interesting to look at.
It wasn't that difficult at first, I mean, I think the ancient civilization, I think a lot of the extremes that had happened was back in the Old Testament, right? When Pharaoh sort of took the Jews as captive, as slaves, and God had done that. God had done that to basically for the Jews to continue calling upon him and constantly needing him, right? Because there was constant phases of God's people where they were learning their lesson, and at times they were complaining again, and there were times when they were being victorious, right? And God would just send them to their own demise at times. So that's when all the violence was back in the past. I think after all that, I think God had, well, at that point when Christ had come and had preached the gospel, when the disciples had gone out, they were so full of zeal. I mean, they witnessed the Son of God, in everything that he did, and they had the perfect example of how to reach people and bring them back to God. And so when he went to Egypt and when they went all around the world, yes, did they all receive some form of resistance? All of them did. All of them were pretty much martyred. I mean, the only one we know that wasn't exactly martyred was St. John, but even then, like, I believe the story goes that he was going to be boiled, that they tried to boil him alive.
They did.
Yeah.
He didn't. Yeah, they tried to kill him. I mean, it wasn't for lack of trying that he survived, basically. But yeah, I'm wondering, because you guys must have some.
Well, the story goes, it was an amazing story, by the way. Like they thought that they had him done for, like he was boiled to death or whatever, but he came out of that hot oil and he came fully alive. He was fully alive and unscathed, and he just rose out of there. And thousands of people in the Colosseum who witnessed it. It was like one of the most glorious days that humanity had ever seen. And nobody ever hears about this story, right? But thousands of Christians, thousands of people were converted to Christianity. And he wasn't even fully martyred. I mean, do you count him as a martyr? I mean,
no, he wasn't. He died of natural causes. They exiled him to Patmos, and then he wrote the Book of Revelation. I guess.
Still consider him a martyr, right? But
Well, you have to be killed to be a martyr.
Well, what I'm saying is I don't know if he had died essentially from being boiled to death from the oil and then rose again. But the point I'm trying to make is when they went out, they knew that they were going to be representing the Son of God, and they had a lot of power, they had a lot of zeal, and they did receive some resistance. But when the gospel got out, I mean, people were just embracing Christianity left and right, like all over the world. Just as the fiery tongues, the Spirit came on them, so was Christianity spreading like a wildfire. And it really was. And people embraced it in Egypt. They said it all made sense because you see it. Even in the hieroglyphics, you have the cross of life. They knew there was something. They knew that there was some sort of mystery between passing of life or passing of death to life. They knew some concept that in order to live, you in essence had to die in some way. There was some sort of saving that was going on. So it all made sense to them. And when when you look at the hieroglyphics and things of this nature, and they saw Ramses II as immortal and as a man, but yet he was still divine. There was still that concept. There was that concept. It made sense, and it kind of all made sense, and people were able to put it together, and they embraced the gospel. And now today, even the hymns that we have are from ancient Egyptian type of tunes. So like today, if you were to listen to, on our Good Friday, the funeral hymn where Christ is in the tomb and we are basically lamenting his death, that comes from an original tune. The hymn is called Golgotha, which was on the Mount of Golgotha when he went to be crucified. That is from a tune from ancient Egyptians they used in funerals. And so that a lot of that stuff passed on, until this day we have a lot of those hymns from that ancient Egyptian heritage traditions.
Yeah, that's really
and even then like they wanted to worship something, right? They're super religious. They want to worship something, but maybe they saw they couldn't quite make sense of sin. They couldn't make sense of what do you do when things aren't perfect? How do you explain that? If there's this glorious God for this and glorious God for that, but they're still finding imperfection in humanity, how do you reconcile that? How do you? So when he brought the message of Christ, it had made sense, because Christ didn't come to be glorified. He came to be crucified, and then he was glorified. So they now were able to put together why there's this sense of suffering, and glory, sort of, kind of back and forth. That in order to find life, you sort of have to pass over death. So it was remarkable. It really was remarkable. All of Egypt was Christian, and it was amazing. And Alexandria is definitely known as one of the cities at the time that gained great attention for education and knowledge of Christian faith. The Library of Alexandria, which unfortunately now there's no remains of it whatsoever, right? And that's unbelievable, right? So like you have thousands and thousands of books that are gone. Even the story goes that the Muslims, even after they burned pretty much all the books that they saw, they went out to like other places where people were keeping them and preserving them, said like, here, look, just go to that area where they saved all these books, and just go and burn the rest of them. So like I said, that ugly, the serpent of old, always shows his head every now and then, and does something really cruel. And that was just another thing. So you do see that in Egypt, where there's Christianity just flourishing, and you have these sort of setbacks, but they're part of being a Christian. Like, the church would not be what it is today if it hadn't been for the martyrs. The martyrs were glorified; they became great saints, and now to this day, they're interceding for us as well to kind of cross over and to pass on this life, to the next. So we are definitely. I was very proud of my heritage. I was so happy to be in Egypt, and it was incredible to see all that. It really was, to say the least.
So when you went to Egypt, did it feel like you were going home?
Well, I mean, look, so Egyptians, they look very similar to, let's just say Indians, for example, or Hispanic people, but let's just say Indians. So, I mean, look, I didn't stick out as much, I guess. This is my people, but besides that, to feel a spirit there that was more authentic, or more the original spirit, yeah, it was different. It was different. Like, this was like, wow, to go to a Coptic church in the land itself was a different feel to it, and just to feel like this is where your roots were from. So much history happened in Egypt, and it's very clearly documented in the Bible. And one of the difference between, I don't mean to go on a tangent here, Iver Kovac, but one of the difference between Christianity and Islam, I want to make this very clear to our audience, because I don't want us to think that we are just calling out a religion or anything like that. One of the most significant differences between Christianity and Islam is you can actually date back, you can actually go to historical sources and see the story of the Bible actually matching up, and pretty accurately too. I mean, not just a little bit, but a lot. It's almost like everything that the Bible has, you can almost have something to go back to in history. A lot of what's in the Quran, like I said, no offense to anybody, there really is not a lot of historical evidence for really what the Quran claims. You will not find any documented history, and that really troubles a lot of Muslims, by the way. If anything, that troubles them the most. Even if a verse in their Quran is absolutely and blatantly wrong, and they know that it's confusing, they can just say, well, just go back to the people of the book, the Injil. They could say that. But when you talk about history, I mean, at that point, when you talk about historical facts, not a single Muslim will have a response. They cannot answer the fact that there's no historical evidence for any of this stuff. Where was it that or even biologically or scientifically speaking? So I don't want to get into these tangents and things of that nature, but historical facts, and I don't want to get into it because that's not our topic, but that's one of the biggest differences.
Yeah, so I asked you that because, like, as you know, I've told you before, maybe our audience doesn't know, but when I was about 22 or 23, I went on a trip to Spain, and I was there for like 3 or 4 weeks. And then I went to Morocco for 2 days. And, like when I flew, going over the ocean and seeing Europe at kind of like as the sun was rising. So like the sun was rising, but there were also like all kinds of small lights shining up from the ground. And I saw like these two things that looked like the two towers. And it reminded me of the Middle Earth just from that height, because I was thinking, hey, this is kind of like how I pictured the Grey Havens. And of course, later on, I found out that when Tolkien wrote when he wrote The Lord of the Rings and also Silmarillion, it is set in Europe. It's like a mythological age for Europe. And when I was there, I went with some other people that it was a college trip. The people that I went with didn't really have the, they didn't really care as much as I did. Like, they didn't really put things in context or anything like that. They didn't understand. But I felt like I was going home. I didn't feel like I was in another country. I felt like I was going home. Now, technically, it kind of is my ancestral home, just like Egypt is your ancestral home. Because, like, if we go back in time 200 years, neither of us have any family living in this country, right? Yeah. So I was looking around, and all the stuff felt so familiar to me, like the Romanesque architecture, the Baroque architecture, the forest, the land, and everything. Of course, these days, today, like I don't want to go to Europe right now. It's socialist, and the EU scares the dickens out of me. But
Sure.
it just felt like natural. And you know, like what you mentioned about there not being any old churches in the United States. I
Yes.
think one thing that we're severely lacking here in the United States is old stuff. And
Mm,
that
yeah.
stuff is important because it's what makes people feel like they have a connection to wherever it is that they're living and a sense of continuity, a sense of inheriting something and passing something along as something that you can be proud of and something that you can identify with. Um,
Yes.
and we just don't have much of that here, you know, and there could be like efforts made to make things look nice. Like one of the things my wife said watching all these illegals that are pouring across the border and all these people coming in, she said, why doesn't the government bring some useful people, some people with skills who can build nice buildings? Because everything they're building now, if you notice, is ugly. And
Mm,
one thing I found out is there was a type of architecture that originated, I think it actually originated in the United States, but it was really big here back in the early 20th century. It's called Art Deco. And part of the inspiration for Art Deco was actually the older Egyptian stuff from like the Middle Kingdom. So, but not completely. It was like a mixture of that. It was inspired by it rather than a continuation. Like the Coptic architecture, as we both know and our audience knows, is a straight continuation, unbroken from the
yeah.
ancient Old Kingdom
Sure.
style. But
Sure.
this was inspired by that. And if you watch, or if you know watch like the Great Gatsby movie that they did, which I actually liked, or look at stuff from the 1920s. That's where they got a lot of their inspiration from. But then after that, the Bauhaus movement kicked off, and
Yeah.
people got this idea like, hey, we should have architecture that's rootless, that is utilitarian, that doesn't borrow from anything that came before. You know, that's just garbage
Yeah.
basically, and doesn't look like anything, and doesn't represent anybody or any culture or any history. Just interchangeable, mundane, cultureless garbage. And
Yeah.
I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, like that's what we're missing here in this country is, you know, culture. I mean, we do have our culture, right? Like we
Right.
have our values and everything, and like the conservative American culture is rooted in Christianity and you know hard work and freedom of speech, but it doesn't really manifest in terms of the way the country looks. So, but it's definitely like stuff is missing, man. And I get like for
Yeah.
you, it's your situation is a little more complicated than mine because Egypt is all Muslim, not all Muslim, but like mostly Muslim, and they're
Mostly.
in charge. So on the one hand, you got like the the churches and the ancient sites like the pyramids and stuff that you can probably easily identify with, but then all this Muslim stuff is a different zeitgeist. It's an alien zeitgeist that's going to manifest in a different way. So,
Well, yeah, and I want to make a point that I did kind of stop when I talked about historical context, but I
yeah,
think the most obvious thing, and I'm glad I did stop because sometimes we do have to think about what we have to think about what we're saying and not jump in historical facts that can be argued. But like, for example, the crucifixion. If you look at the three main things that Christians believe that they're denying that he was crucified, they're denying that he rose from the dead, right? And I guess they're not denying the second coming. So, okay, well, two main things, but it's still the most important thing about Christianity that they're denying that he. Well, first of all, actually, there's three things. They're denying that he's the Son of God. So, can we prove that historically? Okay, well, let me say that at least the crucifixion, they did find the crosses. They do know where Golgotha is. There's all sorts of documentations and proofs by historians that the crucifixion happened,
hmm,
and you can't deny this. The Quran denies this. So in essence, to believe in the Quran, you have to deny thousands of years of documented history. It's very scary. It's very scary how almost deluded you'd have to be, or almost how you have to shut your eyes so much to so much of history. And then even the tomb that he was in, the tomb that he wrote, that he was there for 3 days, and the place where the apostles had said he had ascended from, that was all documented by the apostles.
Yeah.
And they are all saying the same thing. There's 72 apostles, we're talking here, but at least there's 12 that were with him the whole time in his life, and they're all saying the same thing. So the third main thing is, and you can't really talk about history with this, is that they deny he's the Son of God. Okay, well, guess what? That's where faith comes in. So you can have your faith and I can have mine, but when it comes to history, the crucifixion and the resurrection, they know those sites where they saw Jesus at the tomb, and where Mary and had seen him. Mary, Martha, they had seen Christ, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
And they it was very well documented that there was an angel there on the right hand, and talked to her, and that Christ came up and talked to her, and and even so you have the resurrection, and that was documented, and you also have the ascension. So when he ascended and actually had left the apostles and told them, I leave you with you the Holy Spirit. So I go to my Father, and I leave with you the Holy Spirit. So this really, those are the main points. So that way we don't have to get into all these other details that aren't really significant. We're talking about the faiths, and we're basically trying to say that one book has faith in it, and it also has historical facts. Their book has faith in it. It is a faith, but there's no historical context. Doesn't match up with the storyline.
Yeah, the only historicity, I think, and I haven't read the Quran to completion, but I think the only historicity in it is the stuff that deals particularly with what Muhammad was doing himself. But I had a thought, Great Pharaoh.
Sure.
You mentioned Arius, and how his heresy was rooted on the idea that Jesus was a created being and not eternal.
Yes.
And I think it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe something like that too, right? And it also, the Muslims, they believe that as well. So I'm just wondering if Islam might not owe its existence to Arius to some degree.
Well, I mean, why do they deny this? Why are they denying Christ in these faiths? Because Christ did something that they themselves could not attain. And so these religions were really formed from the ego, the ego, man's ego. So, they had to find something that, basically discredited Christ for what he did, because nobody came on earth as selfless as him. He did not start any wars. He did not have any wives. He just basically was serving people and serving everybody but himself. He even said, "He who wants to be first, let him be last." The first will be last, the last will be first. He who wants to be first, let him be the slave of all. So it was the human ego, it was man's ego that had to discredit Jesus, so to speak, so that they can sort of honor mankind. And what is the pride of man? It's procreation, right? Having many wives, having your own, having things, having material things. Jesus was not materialistic, right? So these Jehovah's Witnesses, they had to sort of attribute the Son of God as sort of a created being, not God himself. And they even went far as to say, is like, if you want to be God, then you have to be this way, and you have to have many wives and kids, and you can have many wives. And
that's so Mormonism, Great Pharaoh. That has.
Oh, I apologize. That is Mormonism.
But I think Mormons also, they believe that Jesus is created being as well. I'm not sure, but I think they also share in that same heresy.
Sure.
So
sure.
Yeah, it seems like Arius was the guy that introduced this, because there's other pagan religions that have always been around, like You know, there were still people believing in some of the Greek and Egyptian gods, and other pagans. Like most of the world was pagan, but here they're trying to specifically, rather than just follow a completely pagan religion, they're trying to undermine our religion by introducing a new
And it may
heresy.
not have been man's ego. I mean, Arius could have very well had. So he could have very well claimed that an angel spoke to him, or John Smith claimed that God or an angel spoke to him. But
Yeah.
God said very clearly, even if an angel from heaven preaches a different gospel, let him be accursed.
Hmm.
Muhammad claims that an angel had spoke to him. Like these things do not matter. Like the end that we're trying to preach is Christ's suffering, Christ's death, and Christ's resurrection, salvation. These other religions and areas, they might have been formed. Obviously, there was all heretical, and whether or not they say an angel told them this is really quite irrelevant. It really is, because the point being is that the Christian faith, it was solid. Jesus came, he fulfilled the law, and it was done. It was finished. And he even went on to say, he who adds to this book, who adds anything or any other interpretation, let him be accursed.
Yeah.
So that's
Adds
what
or
happened.
adds or takes away. It's in the
Adds or
last
takes away.
chapter of
So what
Revelation.
do? The Muslims take away a lot of the history, right,
Yep.
of Christianity, and they add to it and say, well, Isa, yeah, was a prophet, and he was still spreading the message of Allah and this, and that. And then they add on, and so Muhammad is now the last prophet. So they take away the history of Christianity, what Isa did, what they say Jesus did, and they call him Isa, and they add things that Muhammad the prophet was saying that really had nothing to do with God, as far as I'm concerned, about whether how many wives you can have, and most of those wives were for him anyway. I mean, he was just adding on certain texts saying, that you can do this, you can do that, because every time he made a mistake or did something that people thought was really weird and really awkward and embarrassing, he would just have to add something there in the hadith, or basically, or in the manuscript or the Quran, that he can have these sort of privileges. So it's very uh, that's where we're at. It's very disturbing, and we just have to keep in mind that these faiths, yeah, could have very well been, a supernatural type of experiences. But anything but guess what? That's what I'm saying. Satan and the angels, the fallen angels, and this and that, God gives them some leeway, and they can lead people astray. The Bible says that even some believers will be led astray. So Satan wants to deceive people, and part of it, I will go as far as saying, yeah, it was more from Satan himself than just some angel telling him something about God, because it's I find it quite shocking how a lot of things in Islam is quite the opposite of Jesus's message. Jesus
Right.
never carried a sword or started any wars. He never tried to acquire things. His message is actually a lot greater. It's a lot more peaceful. It actually is for humanity. It actually is for growth and development. Whereas Muhammad's message, they say, yeah, well, why is Islam spreading so much? Why is Egypt, even this holy blessed land, why is it becoming Muslim? Well, think about it. Islam does not mean peace, by the way. Islam means submit, okay? And they spread by the sword. They spread by the sword. That's what Muhammad taught them. He taught them that's how the faith is spread. You spread it by the sword. You give them citizen rights, second class citizen rights, by the way. You give them you offer them the jizya. You offer them protection. But if you don't pay the jizya, and you don't want to become a Muslim, then we'll offer you, the penalty for, apostasy, which is basically the death penalty.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you do it that way, your religion is going to spread a lot faster, and especially for a misogynistic, ego-driven religion, where basically it gives the man rights over the woman, and gives basically his authority to do whatever and anything that he wants, whenever he wants. So, quite frankly, yeah, okay, Christianity is still, I believe, the number one religion. It's not the fastest growing. Jesus' message was the true message, to be peaceful, to love your neighbor as yourself, to turn if your enemy slaps you on your cheek, give him your other your other cheek. That doesn't mean literally. Back in the day when it says slap on a cheek, it meant that someone's insulting you. So Jesus basically said, if someone insults you, just go ahead, let them just continue insulting you. That's fine, because that message was more effective. That message was able to overcome evil with good. Islam's message was overcome evil with evil. And so even if there was barbarians and people doing bad things at the time, that doesn't give an excuse that this prophet came to sort of straighten things out. I'm sorry, but when you use evil with evil, that doesn't create good. That just produces more evil. They were using the name of God. He was however you want to put it, using the word of God, invoking the name of Allah, of God, to pass on what we know today is now just a political system where it allows men basically to take advantage of women and to just push around people who don't agree with them. So it's a very, I do apologize to a lot of Muslim people out there, my brothers and sisters. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to go off of facts, and I'm trying to help you to make decisions and to use your mind freely as God gave you, to say, this makes sense, this is rational, not to just kind of run away from the topic. I'm trying to give you a tool necessary for you to think freely, and even when we say we submit ourselves to God, sure, there is a sense of submission, but God did not say to do away with your mind altogether. He gave you a mind. He wants you to think on these topics for yourself and to make a correct decision, and to look at the facts. So thanks today, Ivor Kovac, for allowing me to talk about my trip to Egypt. And once again, just being able to kind of bring up these wonderful facts. We like to mix everything up. We like to talk about history, our events, things that we've done. And we sort of get into religion a little bit. So it was definitely great talking to you today, for sure. And to our audience. And so with that being said, I'll just kind of pass it over to you, Ivor Kovac, if there's anything you'd like to wrap up here.
No, I think that's good.
Sure.
It's a good one. Great, Pharaoh. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'd like to thank you, our audience. We thank you so much for being with Great Pharaoh and Ivor Kovac on your favorite history channel, Rediscovery. We want to bring in new ideas, new events. We want you guys to really enjoy these videos. We really want you to enjoy, our personalities, what we kind of bring to the table, and we also want the knowledge. We want to equip our audience with knowledge, so they can always have something to talk about and have a conversation with their friends and bring up these facts. We definitely want to get good conversations going and to learn about these historical facts. They're so fascinating, they're so enriching, so enlightening. So we hope that we gave you some treasures today, hopefully, and we thank you so much for listening to us. Without you guys, we are not able to share our talents and to share our experiences. So we thank you so much for that as well. Without our audience, we couldn't do much of anything. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. With that being said, have a great rest of your afternoon, your evening. Thank you so much. Until next time, Ivor Kovac and Great Pharaoh, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, unus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine, gaudete.